Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about two books about the Western esoteric tradition, and the first one is called The Inner Light by P.T.Mistlberger, and the subtitle is Self-Realization via the Western Esoteric Tradition. Here is the book. And P.T.Mistlberger is quite a good author. I've actually spoken about another of his books on my channel before. This is quite a thick book. It's about 570 pages. It's still available. It's been published in recent years. This is a great overview of the Western esoteric tradition. And the subtitle about self-realization. The reason why that subtitle is used is because the author did practice Eastern methods, which include yoga and things like that. So he had a background in that for many years. But he started to think that for him personally, he wasn't really getting the kinds of success or fulfillment from that. He felt that he wasn't quite getting the outcomes that he felt that he needed or wanted. So he started looking into Western esoteric methods. And there's quite a lot in this book. I have written a few notes about the particular subjects that it covers. It's really in two parts, but I want to talk about the main topics, the main subject areas. So if you are interested in getting this book, you will know what's mainly in here. It talks about Kabbalah. There is a chapter on Kabbalah, but it is Jewish Kabbalah, and it's mainly a short background history of Jewish Kabbalah, which is quite important because the type of Kabbalah that I practice Hermetic Kabbalah, but Hermetic Kabbalah is based on the Jewish Kabbalah framework and some of the concepts. So for people who want to know more about Jewish Kabbalah, and a bit of history, a bit of historical background, this is quite a good book for that. It includes magic. It includes the inner planes. So anyone who wants to know what the inner planes are, it is in this book. It has alchemy, and it looks at alchemy both from the usual traditional alchemy, but it also includes spiritual alchemy, which is the kind of alchemy that I have made videos about on my channel. I have got a playlist about what I call inner alchemy on my channel for people who want to look at that. What is different about this book is that it includes Western psychology and Western philosophy. And I really like that because over many years I have read a lot of esoteric books, and there are not very many that include Western psychology, and this also has a bit of historical perspective as well. Sometimes with Western esoteric books, it will mention Carl Jung. But this book mentions Freud as well, who actually was the predecessor of Jung. And Jung actually trained with Sigmund Freud when he was practicing psychiatry. So I like the way that Western psychology is included in a chapter of this book, because it gives a context about how Western esotericism can intertwine with psychology. And I like the way that it also has some information in here about Western philosophy. Western philosophy is actually quite important in an overall understanding of esotericism, because philosophy underpins esotericism, especially Western esotericism. A lot of people may not be aware that the ancient philosophies of Pythagoras and Plato actually influenced the later developments of Neoplatonism and the Renaissance thought and Rosicrucianism and all of that kind of thing, and then later the Golden Dawn. There isn't much, there's only a relatively short mention of the Golden Dawn and Tarot in here. It's very brief, because this book is not really about that in particular. It's really about Western thought, Western ideas, Western concepts, and how they are intertwined with the Western esoteric tradition. There is quite a good bibliography in here. There is an index, and there are some additional appendices in here as well. I really quite like this book, but the main reasons why I like this book is because of the inclusion of the Western psychology and the Western philosophy, because you would expect the esoteric, all the other esoteric subjects that I mentioned to be in this book. But I think it gives people a wider understanding of how Western psychology and Western philosophy underpins and informs the esoteric thoughts and concepts that were influenced by those things and developed from there. So it is a great book. I'm calling it an overview, but it's a detailed overview. It's quite accessible to read. The Inner Light Self-Realization, start again. The Inner Light Self-Realization via the Western Esoteric Tradition by P.T.Mistlberger. And I just want to make a comment about the term self-realization as well. Self-realization for a lot of people usually means the inner self. I have made a video on my channel. There is in my Esoteric Path playlist, there is a video that I have done about the inner self versus the higher self. Because what happens after many years on the esoteric path? What usually starts out as a search for the inner self usually develops from there into a learning and knowing about the higher self. So I just wanted to point out that distinction about self-realization, because it can be about the inner self and or the higher self. So this book is really worth getting if you want to know more about the subjects that I've mentioned within the Western esoteric tradition. The second book is called Walkers Between the Worlds, The Western Mysteries from Shaman to Magus by Caitlin and John Matthews. And this is quite a classic book, really. This book is distinctly drawn into two main parts. Part one is about shamanism. Part two is about the Hermetic tradition. So this book is different to the first book I just showed because this is more from particularly a Celtic and an English tradition, mainly. But the first book that I just showed does not really talk about shamanism. So the first part of this book is about shamanism. The second part of the book is the Hermetic tradition and the Hermetic path. So I'll just have a look at my notes here about the things that I want to mention about the Walkers Between the Worlds book. So in part one about shamanism, it's mentioning paganism and what is referred to in the book as the Western folk weave. So it's talking about the shamanistic and pagan concepts, and it includes mythology and particular gods. So you could read the shamanism part one separately to part two because they're quite different in approach and they're quite different subjects. Part two is the Hermetic tradition, which came later. And I think the part one about the shamanism and the paganism and the Western folk lore and the mythology, that has been done to set a historical perspective, because that is what was happening before historically. Part two is more about magic and the magician's path, and there's also quite a bit in here. There's more in here about alchemy. There's more in here about magic, and there's more in here about alchemy. And I mean the magicians, for example, such as people like John Dee. And this book has an amazing bibliography. It's very detailed and quite long bibliography. So the bibliography is great, and it's really helpful for people who want to know more and who want to know of other books and other resources. So I particularly like the bibliography in this one, in Walkers Between the Worlds. And Walkers Between the Worlds is about 440 pages. So it's not quite as thick as the first book. And this book is still available, quite easily available too. And there is an index in both books as well, if I haven't already mentioned that. So this second book is a bit more specific. The second book is a bit more specific, but still a great book. You want to know particularly about the shamanistic approach from the Western mystery tradition and the Hermetic path from the Western magic tradition, then this book is really worth getting. And I was already talked about what was in the first book. So they are different kinds of books, but they are also quite detailed overviews as well. So they're both books are really worth getting. Excuse me, both books are really worth getting. So I'll put the details below the video, and I hope that you have found both of these books interesting to hear about and interesting to know about, because they are both great books for people who want to know more about the Western esoteric tradition. I'll put the details below the video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.